He carefully scrapes the date off a check, changes it to his own birth date, and pastes his name over the original. Then he takes a model airplane he had soaked in water, peels the airline logo off the tail, and sticks it onto the modified check. Finally, he places the check inside a heavy book and slams it shut to press it flat, creating a finished forged payroll check. For anyone else, trying to cash this check would be impossible, but for Frank, it is as easy as drinking a glass of water. He not only has a handsome face, but also has the ability to figure out exactly which people are easiest to fool. After careful observation, he sets his sights on a pretty female bank teller. Just like that, Frank successfully cashes the check and is even invited behind the counter for a tour. Marking the moment, his life begins to change. With money in hand, he heads to a suit shop to order a custom suit, buys a sports car, and instantly transforms himself into a wealthy and charming figure. That night at a hotel, Frank uses his new look to get the attention of a beautiful woman who approaches him. She can tell right away that Frank has money, so the moment they enter the room, she gets straight to the point. She pauses and asks Frank how much he is willing to spend. As a 17-year-old high school student, he does not quite understand what she means. She makes her intentions clear, and Frank opens with an offer of $300. She refuses. He offers $500. She refuses again. Frank bids $1,000, and she agrees. This was the price Frank expected all along, so he asks her to wait while he goes downstairs to exchange some cash. He pulls a stack of checks from his pocket and picks one out worth $1,400. As a top-level con artist, his skills go far beyond tricking women. He even plays the FBI like a game until they start doubting themselves. Because of the large number of fake checks being cashed, FBI agent Carl follows the trail and bursts into Frank's apartment to arrest him. Unexpectedly, Frank walks out of the bathroom looking completely calm and starts explaining the features of his printer to Carl without missing a beat. Although Carl is holding a gun, he is thrown off by Frank's confidence and actually takes a few steps back. It looks like Frank is about to take full control of the situation, but Carl's gun is not just for show. He orders Frank to stop and raise his hands or he will fire. Frank immediately claims to be a Secret Service agent and says his partner already has the suspect in custody. Carl does not believe the story and asks to see identification. Frank has no choice but to hand over his wallet. Just as Carl is about to open the wallet, Frank quickly distracts him by pointing his attention toward the window. Seeing Carl hesitate slightly, Frank knows he has won the moment. He flips the situation around, asking for Carl's name and demanding to see his badge. He talks while packing up his printer and checks to leave. When Carl says he wants to go see the suspect together, Frank tells him to stay and protect the crime scene so the hotel maids do not disturb the evidence. Just as Frank is about to walk out, Carl calls out saying he needs to return the wallet. Frank tells him to hold onto it for a minute. Hearing this, Carl completely drops his guard, thinking he has finally caught the con artist he has been chasing for so long. He even smiles with satisfaction. But when he opens the wallet, he is completely stunned because it is stuffed entirely with McDonald's coupons. By the time he realizes he has been played, Frank is already long gone. As a teenager, having such strong nerves and sharp deception skills can largely be traced back to his family and upbringing. Frank grew up in a wealthy family where his parents were deeply in love and life looked perfect from the outside. His father, Frank Sr., was a highly respected businessman who in his best days even spoke at government meetings. He once told a story about how when life gets hard, a person must keep a good attitude, never give up, and take positive steps to create their own success. These simple words were planted like seeds in Frank's heart, slowly growing as he got older. When he is 16, due to certain events, he is moved to a new school. On his very first day, while asking a female student for directions to his classroom, he is mocked by a large male classmate who jokes that his outfit makes him look like a substitute teacher. Hearing this, Frank gets a bold idea. He writes his name on the blackboard and tells the class he is the new substitute teacher. The students are all too intimidated to speak and sit quietly in their seats. Frank then begins teaching in a serious manner and even brings the classmate who mocked him up to the front to read an essay out loud. A short while later, the real teacher walks in and asks if there has been a mistake. But whether it is Frank's appearance or his confidence, the teacher does not suspect a thing and actually thinks she made a wasted trip. Just like that, Frank successfully pretends to be a French teacher, and by the time the school figures it out, he has already been teaching for a full week. The principal calls his parents in and explains that during that week, Frank not only gave lectures and assigned homework, but also held a parent-teacher meeting and sent the student who bullied him to a bakery for an internship. While Frank is waiting outside the principal's office for his punishment, a female classmate approaches with a sick note from her mother asking for leave. Frank sees through it with one look and recognizes that the note is fake. He points out that a real note would have a crease from being folded and carried in a pocket, while hers is completely flat. In this way, he helps her get her leave, but he is not so lucky himself. His mother walks out and tells him he has been expelled. His mother looks upset, but his father simply smiles. To his father, this is not a big deal because he has money and can switch Frank to another school. More importantly, his son has clearly inherited his real talent. However, the good times do not last long. Frank Sr. is soon investigated by the government for tax fraud and the company's money runs out. To try and save the situation, he asks Frank to come with him to the bank for a loan. Around this same time, Frank's parents' relationship begins to fall apart. The stress of the investigation and the financial trouble tears the family in different directions. For Frank, watching his parents' happy home fall apart is devastating. He idolized his father and believed in everything the family stood for. Losing that stability at such a young age pushes Frank down a path he may never have taken otherwise. Feeling lost and with no anchor in his life, Frank decides to run away from home rather than choose between his parents during their divorce. With almost no money and nowhere to go, he has to figure out how to survive on his own. That is when his natural ability to read people and think fast becomes his main tool. He starts cashing forged checks at banks, using his charm and confidence to make tellers trust him completely. Each successful scam gives him not just money, but a rush that keeps him going. Frank quickly realizes that dressing the part makes everything easier. He figures out that a pilot's uniform opens almost every door. People treat pilots with automatic respect and trust, which means nobody questions them. He gets a Pan Am pilot's uniform and starts using it to cash fake checks at banks and hotels across the country. Not long after, he discovers that a doctor's white coat works just as well. He begins calling himself Dr. Frank Connors and lands a job at a hospital in Georgia, supervising young medical interns. He knows nothing about medicine, but is smart enough to let the real doctors around him do the real work while he signs off on their decisions. It is at the hospital that Frank meets Brenda, a nurse he falls deeply in love with. For the first time in years, he feels something real. Brenda is kind and genuine and sees something good in him, which makes him want to be a better person. He proposes to her, and she says yes. When he meets her family, her father asks Frank about his plans for the future. Frank, wanting to impress him, mentions he studied law before becoming a doctor. Her father then suggests Frank take the bar exam and work as a lawyer since they need someone like him in their family firm. Wanting to do right by Brenda and her family, Frank actually studies for the bar exam. He fails the first time, then he fails again, but on his third try, he passes. He is now a licensed attorney in Louisiana, having taught himself law from scratch while living a completely fake life. Meanwhile, FBI agent Carl has never stopped chasing him. Carl has been tracking Frank across the country for years, following the trail of fake checks and false identities. He is frustrated, but also quietly impressed by how clever Frank is. Every time Carl gets close, Frank slips away again. Just before his wedding to Brenda, Frank finds out that Carl is closing in on him. The agents are about to show up and arrest him. Rather than let Brenda and her family get caught up in the chaos of his arrest, Frank makes the painful decision to disappear. He leaves without a word, breaking Brenda's heart and walking away from the one real thing he had found. He runs to Europe and eventually settles in a small town in France, which is where his mother originally came from. He starts a new operation there, printing fake checks of such high quality that even banks struggle to tell the difference. Back in the United States, Carl takes the checks to experts who are amazed by the quality of the forgery. They tell him that very few people in the world could produce work this precise and that it requires special equipment. This information helps Carl narrow down his search. Following the clues, Carl finally traces Frank all the way to that small town in France. On Christmas night, Carl finds Frank in an old abandoned printing factory. Unexpectedly, Frank does not panic at all. Instead, he seems almost happy to see Carl. Over the years, Frank had developed a strange habit. Every Christmas, he would call Carl just to chat about everyday life. Over time, Carl had become both his enemy and the closest thing he had to a friend. So seeing him now feels almost like seeing family. But Carl warns Frank that dozens of French police officers are waiting outside and that if he cannot put handcuffs on Frank within 5 minutes, they will rush in and may shoot him on the spot. Frank is not sure whether to believe him, but he is not willing to risk his life. He chooses to trust Carl, puts on the handcuffs, and walks out of the factory with him. Outside, there is not a single officer in sight. Just as Frank thinks Carl tricked him, sirens go off and a large number of police suddenly arrive at the scene. Because it is an international chase, the French authorities take Frank into custody on the spot. Carl wants to follow, but is stopped. 2 months later, after going through a long and difficult process, Carl finally completes the paperwork to bring Frank back to the United States. But by that time, Frank looks barely like himself, having been through terrible conditions. Even so, he is still thinking about how to escape. But his body is too weak and he eventually collapses. Sitting on the plane back to the United States, Carl asks Frank how he managed to pass the bar exam and fool the examiners. Frank does not answer. Before the plane lands, Frank begs Carl to let him make a call to his father. Carl hesitates before finally telling him that his father has passed away. The news completely destroys Frank. He rushes to the bathroom and cries without stopping. Carl waits outside to give him time, not keeping close watch. But after a while, something feels wrong, and they break down the door. Frank has vanished. It turns out Frank used his knowledge of aircraft to crawl through the toilet chute to the landing gear and slipped away before the plane fully stopped. He made his way to his mother's new home, but when he arrives, he sees that his mother has moved on completely. She is living a happy new life with a new family and even has a young daughter. In that moment, Frank feels completely empty inside. He suddenly understands that true belonging was never about fake identities or perfect disguises. It was about living honestly in the present. He does not want to disrupt his mother's new life, so when the police arrive, he actually asks Carl to arrest him quickly, saying there is nothing left in this world worth staying for. Because of how serious his crimes were, Frank is sentenced to 12 years in prison. During that time, Carl visits him often, not to judge him, but to ask for his help in spotting new fake checks appearing on the market. Over time, being needed and being able to use his skills for something meaningful gives Frank a real sense of purpose. Carl begins to see Frank differently. He believes Frank is a rare talent that should not be wasted behind bars. So he works behind the scenes and brings his boss to the prison to see Frank's abilities firsthand. Eventually, the decision is made to release Frank early on, the condition that he works for the FBI under supervision. Just like that, Frank goes from being a criminal to being an expert fighting crime. He has endless files to read and cases to analyze every day. But even though he has his freedom back, as someone who has always loved running free, this kind of life feels too tight. So on a weekend, he pulls his old trick and puts on a pilot's uniform to slip away. But before he gets far, Carl catches up to him. This time, however, Carl has no intention of arresting him. Instead, he tells Frank with complete confidence that he knows Frank will come back on Monday. After all these years, no one knows Frank better than Carl does. He knows the real reason behind all of Frank's crimes was simply to find the warmth of a real family. Deep down, Frank is not a bad person. He is just someone who lost his way. 2 days pass and Monday arrives. 5 minutes after the workday starts, Frank has not shown up and Carl begins to worry. There is a new check fraud case on his desk that he has been studying for a long time without finding the flaw. Just as he is at his limit, a hand reaches over his shoulder. He looks up and sure enough, it is Frank. After one careful look, Frank spots the trick right away. The check is actually real, but has been washed with a chemical called acetone to remove the original writing. Carl shakes his head in amazement at Frank's talent. And with that, the film comes to an end. This film is based on a true story. The real Frank Abagnale later became a world-famous expert in fighting fraud. He designed highly secure checks that are now used by major companies and banks around the world, earning him millions of dollars in fees every year.